Here we are again, tools of the trade. This time we've done our prototyping, this time soldering. So let's get a move on with our soldering. Sorry for the bench shake. And here we are, here's our tools down here. Okay, we'll run you through them a piece at a time. Take a look down here, we've got all manner of goodies on the bench. So it's piece them all together for you. What you need, first of all, what you need is a soldering iron. Okay, tell you a little bit more about soldering irons again, which one to actually go for, because there's two main types. Well, there's lots of two different types, but two categories nowadays. Okay, so first up, soldering iron. Okay, get yourself a temperature controlled soldering iron. Okay, don't buy the ones with soldered the mains cable attached to this. Okay, don't get just the mains cable attached to one of these with a plug coming out at the end, because they are absolutely crap. They will destroy your work. Okay, they're cheap, they're cheerful. Okay, they do what they say on the tin, they do soldering, but you don't have any control over them. Okay, usually the temperature what they give you is absolute maximum. Okay, you don't want to overkill this stuff. They're okay for doing I don't know, maybe occasional thicker cables, shields, if you're trying to solder heat sinks onto your circuit boards, like I said, doing thick cables like mains cables, things like that, tinning, okay, but if you're not careful they will wreck your work. Okay, especially if you're dealing with delicate surface mount stuff. So get yourself a temperature controlled one. They can solder at high temperature because you can rack the temperature right the way up. They can solder at low temperature because you don't turn them right the way down. Okay, it gives you a lot of control. Okay, also you want to get yourself a well-known brand. Okay, don't get any of these Chinese rip-off, cheap and cheerful crap things. You know, temperature control, 20 quid off the shelf. Okay, get yourself a really good one. The reason for that is you have to change your soldering tips. If you can't change the soldering tip, it really limits you in what you can solder. Okay, the types of components you can solder, and if you have to change the bit because you do kill your bit, okay, they do wear out over time, you want to be able to get hold of them quite readily. Okay, so make sure that you do get one that's on the market, that's not going to go out of stock, and easy to get hold of. So a well-known brand it is. Try and go for Weller, Antex, Zytronics. Okay, all good brands. Okay, all out there on the market. There's tons of other brands out there. Have a look through, take a look at some soldering iron reviews, and pick a good one. Next thing, that's your soldering iron. You need this stuff here, solder. Okay, don't go for the thick solder, go for thin. Thin is best. Okay, thick solder is only really any good if you're doing any large bulky items, like I said before. Big iron, big power, use a big solder. Large things only, heavy cabling, heat sinks that are attached to the boards, RF shielding, screening, things like that, you know, that you want to tack down to the board. That's the only time when you use a thick solder. What I recommend you do is to get the thinner solder. If you can see this stuff here, okay, solder, say between say 0.5 0.7 millimeters thick solder. Okay, thin is best because use a thick solder. You try and solder a small component, you end up chucking loads and loads of solder on your board, and it ends up balling up and it looks nasty and crappy. You end up with tons of solder on the board. Okay, and it can cause short circuits because you've got less control over how much solder is going on the board. Small solder, thin, a little bit at a time, not enough. Feed more in. Too much, you can never have too much. Okay, you need to plug tons and tons of this stuff into your joint before you get too much solder onto your board. Okay, thinner is better. Okay, a little bit more expensive, but it's good. The other thing, okay, get the solder which has a flux core. Some solders don't contain flux. A lot of solders nowadays do contain flux, okay? Make sure that you do get flux in the solder, because flux helps your solder wet, okay? It helps the solder wetting, it helps it flow to your to whatever you're soldering to, okay? Gives you a really, really good bond. Flux is brilliant. And if you don't have enough flux, or you've used up all the flux, because when you do soldering you vaporise the flux, okay, you might want to add some flux to your board. So here we are, got some flux here, okay. This is actually a flux brush, okay. It's got a brush tip, okay. You can get things like flux pens, you can get flux on its own, you can get flux brushes like this, but all in all you really need to get some flux, because it will help you do some soldering. Other things what you need, just like in the prototyping section before this, you need your pliers and your cutters, okay. So pliers and cutters, definitely. Pliers to help you push components into holes, okay, and pull them through. You want to trim off your through hole stuff, you need your side cutters. Other things that you need, usually when you're soldering, you're using both hands, okay. So you got one hand soldering the solder, like that, okay. You got your other hand holding your iron and you're soldering your board. How do you hold your board? It's going to fly all over the place unless you keep hold of it. You can either tape it down, plug your components in, tape it down, untape it, tape it down again, okay, blue tack it, whatever you want. Keep your board in place, but it's a real pain in the arse. What I suggest you do is get something. This is a cheap little helping hand, okay. It's 2 clips, heavy base. You can clip either your 2 wires in here, one on either side, solder in between. You don't have to hold on to your cables. You have to hold your wire, or you can attach your circuit board to the clips, okay, and it gives you a little bit of weight and a little bit of control holding your circuit board in place while you're soldering. Really good things. Helping hands. It's a 3rd or 4th pair of hands for you. Brilliant. Other stuff what you need, okay. When you're soldering surface mount, it's becoming more and more popular nowadays. Loads of through hole stuff is disappearing off the market. What you need, magnifying glass, okay, so you can get up close, okay. Now when you're, like before, when you're soldering you need both hands, so pick out a magnifying glass which you can stand on your bench. You can put your work underneath it, okay, and it's pretty cool. It works. You get quite close with my camera. I might use this for when I do my soldering exercise with you. You can see exactly close up what I'm doing. Yeah. Back on subject, okay. You can keep that on the bench. Upright, your board underneath, you can get your soldering iron underneath, you can see through the top, you can see exactly what you're doing when you're doing surface mount. Other stuff what you need when you're doing surface mount, tweezers. Get yourself a really good set of tweezers, okay. Don't go for the cheap and cheerful brand, okay. Go for some good quality S&D tweezers, okay. Come in all different shapes and sizes so you can get hold of all your components, and make sure that they do come with this type, okay, reverse pressure tweezers, okay. So when they're relaxed, okay, they're actually going to hold your component in place, and it only lets go when you apply pressure, okay. So apply pressure, it actually opens when I apply pressure. Very useful. Why? When you're soldering and placing your component onto the board, if you're using the standard set of tweezers, you have to relax your grip in order for them to open up. Because you relax your grip and you open up, you can easily drop these onto your circuit board and they'll knock off all your components, all your surface mount ones that you just carefully placed all over the board, and it can ruin your work. Whereas this one, no pressure, you can hold onto your component and you only apply pressure, so you're keeping hold of them when you're actually releasing your component. So you're never ever going to drop these when you're placing surface mount components, or you're holding your surface mount component while you're soldering. Really, really useful pair of tweezers, okay. Make sure that you do get some of them, okay. Other things that you need for desoldering, tweezers all come in useful because you can tug the components out while you melt the solder. Other components what you need. Desolder pump. Okay. Prime it by pushing down on the top. When you melt your solder, push the button and it sucks up the solder that's melted, so it sucks molten solder. The other thing that you need, desoldering, maybe some solder braid, some solder, it's called different things, it's called solder braid, solder wick, okay, 2 different words, it's called desolder wire sometimes, it's half a dozen different names, but this one's, as you can see, is called desolder wick. It's actually a braided copper which contains some flux, okay? Not much flux in there, so it's always best to add your flux for when you're removing solder, because you actually took the flux out. One use for your flux. All that you do with this, you place it on top of your joint where your solder is. You bring your soldering iron in on top. Okay, so soldering iron top, you lay it on top, and your solder actually flows into the copper braid. Okay, so it's a good way of removing either excess, okay, solder, or to desolder a joint. Now, if you've got a lot of solder in the joint, you know, it's through hole, use this, it gets rid of a ton of solder. This gets rid of little bits of solder, and it's used for touch-up work and tidying up your work. Okay, keep it tidy to remove solder, take the solder more or less all the way off. That's those things. Other things what you need, tip care. Okay, on your soldering iron, okay, you got your tip. It takes a hell of a lot of hammering, a hell of a lot of heat, a hell of a lot of abuse. Try and keep it clean, okay? When you keep it clean, wet sponges, okay? Normally these come with the iron, okay, but you can buy them separately, and keep a few of them because they do go pretty quickly, you know. Okay, whenever you're soldering, clean your iron, okay? Wet sponge does that. And the other stuff is this stuff here is the used one, still using it. It's tip bright, okay, or tip tinner. So if your soldering iron gets really nasty, it starts oxidising, it doesn't heat up properly, you find it's not melting the solder, it generally needs to be clean. And you can always tell when it needs to be clean because you can actually look at the tip. If you take a look at this one, okay, it's you can see that it's a nice and shiny tip, nice and clean. When it starts oxidising, it starts to go this sort of colour, nasty brown, dull grey, it's not shiny, okay. The heat isn't going to get to the tip, it's not going to be on the surface of the tip, so it's not going to melt your solder, you're not going to be doing much soldering with it. Get yourself some tip tin and a nice wet sponge, make sure that you keep your bits nice and clean. Last but not least, okay, well, it's not the last, but coming along to the last few things that you need. When you're doing surface mount, get yourself some surface mount solder paste, okay, SMD solder paste, okay, really useful stuff, okay, if you've got a hell of a lot of pins that you've got to solder, okay, or you want to hold on to the component while you're doing some soldering, it's always best to use some solder paste because you can squeeze it out, it's like liquid solder. Now I can get some out of the tip here, okay, and take the needle off so you can see it, okay, oops, dripping, okay, you can see it just there on the tip, okay, I'm going to squeeze a little bit of that out, okay, you can see it on the tip, okay, that's liquid solder, okay, it's like a gel. You can put that onto your pads, put your surface mount component on top of it, and you can solder your surface mount device in place while you're holding the soldering iron. Don't need any solder because it's on the board. Brilliant. Other stuff you need, okay, some cleaning products before you start soldering. It's always good to clean your board. IPA, scrub block, okay. If you find that you're soldering onto bare copper, okay, more than likely it has oxidised, okay. Copper's a right bugger when it's in open air, okay. As soon as air hits copper, it starts oxidising, once you've got that oxide layer on top, it's a nightmare to solder to. Okay, there's ways around it, tons of flux. Okay, it gets rid of the oxide, it cleans your board slightly, it allows you to solder a little bit more smoother. The other option you got is a PCB scrub block. Okay, you can scrub your tracks with this, okay, your copper area that you're going to solder to, and it's quite abrasive, so if your component already has been soldered down, you desoldered it, you can't put a new one in, don't use one of these because it may lift or start pulling at your tracks a lot. If it's a fresh board, you can use one of these, scrub back the oxide layer, you get a nice shiny bit of copper, you can solder to it really easily. The other thing, like I said, IPA, okay, isopropanol, basically spray alcohol. Okay, you can use that to clean down your board. You also use this to clean down your board after you solder. Okay, after you solder, you've got tons of flux on your board, dry flux, horrible brown sludgy stuff on the bottom sometimes. Okay, use this, squirt over the top, brush it off with a nice firm brush, and you can brush into it, polishes up your board, gets rid of that flux, which is going to corrode your joint a little bit if you leave it on the board. Okay, because it does do that. Flux does help, and it is a hindrance. Okay, if you leave it on your board for prolonged periods of time, it will damage your joint. Okay, but it's there to help us. Once it's helped us, get rid of it off the board. Okay, and that is the tools that you need for soldering. Okay, a lot there to take in. Mainly all that you need is the iron, your solder, a few bits of desoldering stuff, that's it. Okay, unless you're dealing with surface mount, you need that extra stuff as well usually. But saying that, surface mount, you can solder surface mount with wire. I do it a hell of a lot, okay, because sometimes it is a damn sight easier, and that's all that you need. Now, like I said at the beginning, soldering irons, two types. Temperature controlled, yes. Changeable tips, yes. Leaded and unleaded, okay. Just like the automotive industry, leaded petrol, unleaded petrol. You can get leaded irons, you can get unleaded irons. You can get unleaded solder, you can get leaded solder. Okay, you can get unleaded components, you can get leaded components. Either you make the decision now and either go completely lead free, make a decision, go leaded, or get two irons, okay, yep, two soldering irons, one for leaded, one for unleaded, because you cannot mix leaded and unleaded. Okay, if you try and do use a unleaded solder on a leaded soldering iron, the chemical components in that unleaded solder will eat away at your leaded solder tip, and you'll be changing your tips quite regularly. Use the right solder, unleaded with unleaded, perfectly fine. Leaded with a leaded iron, okay. Leaded soldering bits containing lead, solder containing lead, matching them up, okay. Very important thing, okay. If you use leaded and unleaded together, just like in a car, it will wreck your kit, okay. Just like putting leaded petrol into an unleaded car, it will kill your engine, okay. You'll be taking it into the garage, new engine, mate, okay. New fuel tank, new everything, okay. Same thing with your soldering iron, okay. Use unleaded on your tips, they'll kill your tips, okay. Leaded, unleaded, and leaded. It's a pain, but it's something that we have to deal with nowadays because of the eco warriors out there. Okay, mustn't use lead, it's poisonous, go lead free. Now we've got two things to worry about. What we're actually doing, what we're using, what we've got in our hands, okay. What are we soldering? Is it an old piece of kit, is it a new piece of kit, is it leaded, is it unleaded on the board, who knows, right? Pain in the arse. But when we go on to our soldering tutorial, okay, I'll run through how to solder. It's very important, okay. Solder the wrong way, your joint will never work. Solder the right way, and no matter what you do in the future, you'll never ever go wrong, okay. Once you know how to solder, you've got the basics, you can't go wrong. Even if you try to go wrong, you can't go wrong. Okay, and that's it. See you next time. Stop.